Imagine this. You walk into your local pharmacy, you grab the pain reliever everyone trusts, right? The one probably sitting in your own medicine cabinet right now, and you unknowingly bring home something. Well, something lethal. That sounds like a thriller plot, but it wasn't. It was the terrifying reality in Chicago, fall of 1982.
Yeah, absolutely terrifying. And Tylenol, especially the extra strength capsules, was huge for Johnson & Johnson. It was like the gold standard for trust, for convenience. It had this massive market share, like 35% of over-the-counter pain relief, a $500 million product back then. But then, literally over 48 hours, it became linked with random, sudden death. And that trust, it just vanished overnight.
So today we're doing a deep dive into the Chicago Tylenol murders. It's this awful story, a random act of violence that killed 7 people. It caused this huge nationwide panic, and it fundamentally changed consumer safety forever. I mean, the seals you see on bottles today, that's directly because of this.
Yeah.
And the really chilling part, this mass poisoning, it's still officially unsolved, even today, over 4 decades later.
Right. And our sources, they really detail the whole thing, not just that tragic timeline, minute by minute, but also the investigation that followed, which was massive, intensive, but full of these frustrating dead ends and, well, 3 main suspects who were looked at very, very closely. We'll track how this crisis led to huge changes, shifting us from, well, trusting simple packaging to demanding visible proof that products are safe.
Okay, let's get into that timeline, because what's so horrifying here is how quickly it went from these weird, isolated medical emergencies to a confirmed large-scale crime, a conspiracy, really.
It started with Mary Kellerman, just 12 years old, living in Elk Grove Village, a quiet Chicago suburb. It was Tuesday, September 28th, 1982. She woke up feeling, a bit off, like maybe a cold coming on or just a headache, normal kid stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And her parents did what anyone would do back then. They gave her 1 extra-strength Tylenol capsule, the go-to fix. But our sources say she took that capsule, walked towards the bathroom, and just collapsed. Right there. Paramedics got her to the hospital, but she died the next day.
And for the doctors, the medical examiners, it just didn't add up. A healthy 12-year-old dying so suddenly after taking Tylenol. They were looking for natural causes, maybe some rare condition, a brain hemorrhage, something like that. The idea of murder through an over-the-counter pill, that wasn't even on the radar, not in the protocols back then.
It's hard to fathom, but that initial shock, that single baffling death, was about to get so much worse. Because the very next day, September 29th, this truly devastating tragedy hit the Janus family in Arlington Heights. It really showed the scale of what was happening.
Yeah, Adam Janus, yeah. He was 27, worked at the post office. He felt unwell, reached for Tylenol just like Mary, collapsed at home around 3:15 p.m., taken to the hospital, died later that day. And again, doctors were puzzled. They initially thought maybe a massive heart attack, even though he was young for that. The cardiac failure was just so sudden.
And this next part, it's just heartbreaking. It shows the absolute cruel randomness of it all. News about Adam spread, obviously, and later that same day, his family gathered at his house to grieve. His younger brother, Stanley Janus, who was 25, he came over. He apparently had some chronic back pain. And Stanley's wife, Teresa Janus, she was only 19 or 20. She arrived too, completely distraught, developed a stress headache,
Right.
From the shock and grief.
And in this moment of just awful normalcy, dealing with pain and stress, they both decided to take something. They reached for that Tylenol bottle, the orange and white one, the exact same bottle Adam had used just hours before.
Oh, no.
The outcome.
It was immediate.
Instantaneous.
Yeah.
And horrific. Stanley died that evening. Teresa fell into a coma. She died 2 days later on October 1st.
Yeah.
So now you have 3 healthy people, 1 family, dead within hours,
Yeah.
all after taking pills from the same bottle. That sequence, 3 deaths tied to 1 physical object. That just screamed this wasn't natural. It had to be deliberate.
It had to be. I mean, the odds are just impossible otherwise.
Exactly. And the sources really stress this point. The sheer impossibility is what finally pushed investigators towards a criminal angle. You have to remember, in '82, product tampering poisonings, almost unheard of. The default assumption was always natural causes. But 3 deaths, same family, same bottle, that couldn't be ignored. It demanded a much closer look.
Okay, so this is where the investigation really starts to pivot.
Okay.
And it's thanks to some sharp local officials, right? Like Nurse Helen Jensen.
Yes, Nurse Helen Jensen. She was the only public health official in Arlington Heights at the time. She went to the Janus house, and she zeroed in on that Tylenol bottle immediately. She noticed a key detail. It looked recently bought, and exactly 6 capsules were missing. She started putting it together. Maybe Adam took one, Stanley and Teresa one each. Maybe Mary Kellerman, the 12-year-old, took one from a similar bottle from the same batch. Even when others weren't sure, she insisted the bottle was crucial evidence. She took it, got it straight to investigator Nick Pichos.
So Pichos gets the bottle, and he takes it to the medical examiner's office.
Right, to Deputy Chief Medical Examiner Edmund Donahue. Donahue was already thinking poison, given how sudden the deaths were of the cardiac failure. He suspected cyanide. So he asked Pichos to do this simple, almost old-fashioned test. Just smell the contents of the bottle.
Smell it. Can you actually smell cyanide?
Well, here's the interesting thing. Potassium cyanide can give off this distinct bitter almond smell. But genetically, only about half the population can actually detect that odor. Pichos, luckily, or perhaps unluckily for him in that moment, was one of the 50%. He took a sniff and instantly recognized it. He yelled out, "Cyanide!" Just like that.
Wow. Just wow. And the lab test confirmed it.
Absolutely confirmed the nightmare.
Yeah.
They analyzed the remaining capsules in that bottle, 44 of them. 4 capsules were packed with potassium cyanide. And not just a little bit, we're talking nearly 3 times the lethal dose for an adult in each capsule. This wasn't some manufacturing error. This was clearly intentional, calculated murder, aimed at whoever happened to buy that bottle.
So once they knew it was cyanide, the whole picture started coming together fast.
Exactly. The floodgates opened. They quickly realized Mary Kellerman's death fit the pattern perfectly. Her bottle was from the same area, likely tampered in the same way.
And then more victims started surfacing across different suburbs.
Yeah, the reports started linking up. Arlington Heights, Elk Grove Village, Schaumburg, Chicago itself, Winfield. It was spreading. The initial death toll climbed to 7. We learned about Mary McFarland, 31 years old. She took Tylenol at work in Schaumburg.
And Mary Reiner.
Mary Reiner, yes,
Yeah.
27. A new mother, recovering from childbirth in Winfield, took pills brought home from the hospital, collapsed immediately. The randomness is just staggering. A young mom, a 12-year-old girl, a postal worker. There's no specific target. The target was just anyone who used Tylenol.
And the last victim in that first wave? Paula Prince.
Paula Prince, 35. A flight attendant actually visiting from Las Vegas, found dead in her Chicago apartment. And near her was an open bottle of extra-strength Tylenol she'd just bought at a Walgreens. The fact that these bottles came from different stores, different chains, across different towns, it proved this wasn't a factory issue. This was happening locally, on the ground, after the product hit the shelves.
The realization must have been terrifying for the public.
Completely. Authorities knew they had to act immediately. They held an emergency press conference. The message was stark. Stop taking Tylenol. Now. Period. Police cars were literally driving through the streets using loudspeakers, not for a chase, but to warn people, throw away your Tylenol. The idea that this trusted household staple was now a weapon, it sent shockwaves way beyond Chicago.
So chaos erupts. People are terrified, emptying medicine cabinets. How did investigators even begin to contain this? They must have thought about lot numbers first, right?
They did. Initially, the focus was on that first lot number identified, MC2880. The one linked to the Kellerman and Janus deaths. Johnson & Johnson issued a limited recall just for that batch, but almost immediately that strategy fell apart because contaminated bottles started showing up from completely different lot numbers, 1910MD, MB2738.
Okay, that's a critical distinction. Different lots mean.
It means the tampering couldn't have happened at the J&J manufacturing plants in Pennsylvania or Texas. It absolutely had to have happened after the bottles were manufactured, sealed, boxed, and shipped out. It pointed directly to local tampering, somewhere in the Chicago distribution chain, or, more likely, right on the store shelves.
And the contaminated bottles were found in all sorts of different stores.
Yeah, totally unrelated places. 2 different Jewel food stores, an Osco Drug, a Walgreens, a Dominick's, even a smaller place called Frank's Finer Foods. It showed whoever did this was either moving around a lot, or they knew how to strategically place these bottles in high-traffic stores across the area.
The threat was local, but the fear went global almost instantly, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Our sources mentioned customs agents at international airports starting to ask travelers, are you carrying any Tylenol? The brand's reputation, built over decades, just crumbled worldwide in a matter of days.
And the method. How is it so easy to do this? You mentioned the packaging back then.
That was the key vulnerability. The packaging in 1982 was ridiculously simple by today's standards. Non-tamper evident, often just a cardboard box, maybe a plastic cap that just popped off, and inside maybe a little cotton ball stuffed in the top. That was it.
So the killer could just buy a bottle.
Pretty much. Investigators believe the killer likely bought bottles off the shelf like any customer, took them somewhere private, popped the cap, pulled out the cotton. Then, the crucial step, physically pull apart the 2 halves of the gelatin capsule.
Because they were filled with powder.
Right. Exactly. Empty out the white acetaminophen powder, replace it with potassium cyanide powder, which looks quite similar. Then just snap the capsule halves back together, put them back in the bottle, put the cotton back in, put the cap back on, place the bottle back on a store shelf. To the next person buying it, the box looked fine, the bottle looked sealed enough. Nothing seemed wrong until it was too late.
The choice of poison, potassium cyanide, why that specifically? Was it just about speed?
Speed was definitely a factor. Cyanide works incredibly fast. It stops your cells from using oxygen, leading to essentially internal suffocation and that rapid cardiac arrest we saw in the victims. But there's a chemical detail that's really interesting, maybe gives a clue about the killer's timing.
What's that?
Potassium cyanide is corrosive. If that powder sat inside the gelatin capsule for too long, say, for months on a shelf, it would start to eat away at the gelatin. The capsule would get soft, maybe discolored. It would look obviously tampered with. The fact that the tampered capsules looked normal suggested the killer placed them on the shelves fairly recently. They likely expected them to be bought and used quickly. The intent was immediate lethal impact.
So the public is panicking, the investigation is scrambling, and Johnson & Johnson is facing, well, utter corporate ruin. Their flagship product is killing people. Market share collapsing from 35% down to just 8%.
It was an existential crisis for them. But their response became like the textbook example of how to handle a crisis. They brought in PR executive Harold Burson and made a critical decision: public safety and honesty first, above everything, even if it meant staggering financial losses right away.
And the scale of that response was huge, wasn't it? The recall.
Massive. On October 5th, 1982, J&J recalled all Tylenol capsules nationwide. Not just the suspect lots, everything. That was 31 million bottles, the value, over $100 million back then, which, adjusted for inflation, is like $326 million today. Just pulled off the shelves. Unprecedented.
And they didn't just recall, did they? They cooperated fully.
Completely. Total transparency with the FBI, the FDA, Chicago PD. Opened their books, shared logistics data. They put up a $100,000 reward immediately for information leading to the killer. And importantly, they offered to exchange any capsules people had at home for the solid tablet form of Tylenol, which was much, much harder to tamper with.
That proactive approach, it really paid off in terms of public trust, didn't it?
It really did. People saw them taking responsibility. The Washington Post famously praised them for their honesty, saying they set a new standard for corporate behavior in a crisis, and it worked amazingly fast. By November 1982, just weeks later, they were already starting to reintroduce Tylenol, but now in new triple-sealed, tamper-evident packaging. And they heavily promoted the tablet and the new caplet forms.
And they regained their market share.
Astonishingly, yes. Within about a year, they'd clawed back most of that lost market share. It proved that doing the right thing, even at enormous cost, could save a brand. They also eventually, in 1991, settled all the lawsuits with the victims' families. Undisclosed amounts, but it was about closing that chapter.
Okay, but let's look behind the curtain a bit. The PR was stellar, textbook even. But the finances, there's a bit of a snag with insurance, right?
There was. It's a fascinating side note. McNeil Laboratories, the J&J subsidiary that made Tylenol, tried to claim that $100 million recall cost back from their insurance company, affiliated FM Insurance. The insurer denied the claim.
Why? On what grounds?
Because J&J hadn't actually bought specific recall insurance. They had general liability, but not the specific, more expensive policy covering voluntary recalls. McNeil sued the insurer, but the court sided with the insurance company.
What was the court's reasoning? That seems counterintuitive given the situation.
The court's logic, based on the source material, was really specific. They ruled that the recall wasn't caused by J&J's liability for the 7 deaths themselves. Instead, the deaths served as notice to J&J that the remaining product might be harmful. So the recall, while absolutely the right ethical moves and great PR, was seen legally as a voluntary action taken to prevent future harm and protect the brand's reputation. It wasn't covered under their existing policy.
So J&J ultimately paid that massive cost out of pocket.
Yes. They absorbed the full $100 million plus. It highlights that sometimes doing the right thing for public image and long-term survival comes with a very real, immediate financial hit that insurance might not cover. A tough lesson in corporate reality.
Okay, so J&J manages the crisis, the packaging changes, but the actual killer, still out there, the police, the FBI, that big reward, none of it led to an arrest for the murders themselves. It's kind of amazing, really. Decades later, still unsolved. Tracking this person was like chasing a ghost.
It really was. Especially back then. Without the advanced forensics we have today, the initial investigation cast a wide net. Anyone with cyanide access, anyone acting weirdly, anyone trying to cash in on the panic, And the suspect who dominated the headlines for the longest time was James William Lewis.
Lewis, the extortionist, right. He sent a letter.
Exactly. He's described as this really intelligent guy, a tax accountant, but also a bit of a chameleon, used loads of aliases, like 20 of them. He got caught because he sent this very specific letter to Johnson & Johnson's CEO.
What did the letter say?
It demanded $1 million to stop the killings. He had basically claimed responsibility. And the sources say investigators were really struck by how much detail he included about the poisonings. It suggested inside knowledge.
But didn't he also kind of explain how it could be done while denying he did it?
Yes, that's one of the strangest parts. After he was arrested, he denied the murders themselves. But he apparently willingly walked investigators through the exact method the killer likely used. Buying the Tylenol, opening the capsule, swapping the powder, putting them back on shelves. His description perfectly matched what the investigators were already suspecting. It was almost instructional.
That's incredibly suspicious. And wasn't there forensic evidence linking him to cyanide, too?
There was. Confidential police files mentioned his fingerprints were found inside a book about poisoning, specifically on pages discussing cyanide. He'd owned the book previously. So you had the letter, the detailed how-to, the fingerprint link. It seemed like a strong circumstantial case. He was under intense scrutiny for years.
But he was never actually charged with the murders, only extortion.
That's right. Convicted only for sending the extortion letter. Served 10 years for that. Never murder. The problem was, they could never definitively prove he was the one who physically placed those tampered bottles on the store shelves in Chicago. His defense was that he just wrote the letter opportunistically, trying to cause trouble for his wife's former employer during the media frenzy. Although it's worth noting, Department of Justice investigators as recently as 2009 reportedly still believed Lewis was responsible, even if they couldn't make the homicide charges stick.
And there was something weird about the timing of his letter, too, wasn't there? The postmark.
Yes, a really crucial detail that casts a lot of doubt on his story. He claimed he worked on writing that extortion letter for 3 days, but the letter was postmarked October 1st, 1982.
So if he started 3 days earlier.
It means he would have started writing it before. The story about the Tylenol poisonings really broke wide in the media, which strongly suggests he knew about it beforehand, either because he was the killer trying to profit early or he had some other inside track. When investigators confronted him about this timeline discrepancy years later, apparently he changed his story, backtracked.
Fast forward to the 2000s, they reopened the case with new DNA tech.
They did. Around 2010, the FBI made a push. Lewis and his wife actually provided DNA samples and fingerprints. Lewis seemed confident, saying something like, "If the FBI plays it fair, I have nothing to worry about."
And the results.
Well, the DNA results were clear on one point. The samples from Lewis and his wife did not match the partial DNA profile that investigators had managed to recover from the actual tainted Tylenol bottles. That forensic non-match really complicated things. It didn't completely clear him in everyone's eyes. Maybe he had an accomplice. Maybe he just didn't leave DNA, but it weakened the case significantly.
Yeah.
Lewis died in 2023, still denying involvement, but that cloud of suspicion never fully lifted.
Okay, let's move to the second main suspect, Roger Arnold. His story is also deeply connected to the case and, tragically, ended up causing another death indirectly.
Roger Arnold, yeah. He worked as a dock worker at a Jewel-Osco warehouse in Melrose Park. That warehouse was a key distribution point for some of the stores where contaminated bottles were found. Investigators discovered he had access to potassium cyanide, apparently legally obtained from a previous job. And people described him as, well, unstable.
How did the police get onto him?
Through a tip from a bar owner, Marty Sinclair. Sinclair told police Arnold had been acting increasingly erratic, especially after his marriage broke up. And Sinclair reported hearing Arnold talk about how easy it would be to kill people using some kind of white powder. That immediately put Arnold on the radar.
And were there other connections, things linking him more closely?
There were some interesting, though maybe coincidental, links. Arnold had apparently worked at the same warehouse as Mary Reiner's father. Remember, she was one of the victims. And even more specifically, Arnold's wife had apparently been treated at a hospital that was right across the street from the store where Mary Reiner bought her poison Tylenol. It created this web of potential connections.
Did they find anything incriminating at his home?
They found a copy of that book, The Poor Man's James Bond. It's kind of this infamous underground manual, and it apparently contained instructions on making potassium cyanide. So you had the access, the talk about white powder, the book, the potential geographical links. It looked plausible, but Again, they could never actually prove he tampered with the bottles or placed them in stores.
So he was questioned but never charged with the Tylenol murders either.
Right. He was brought in multiple times, questioned intensely, but ultimately released. Not enough evidence for homicide charges. But Arnold felt persecuted by the investigation. He became fixated on it. And this leads to that really tragic twist.
The mistaken identity shooting.
It's exactly. In the summer of 1983, months after being released, Arnold became obsessed with getting revenge on Marty Sinclair, the bar owner he blamed for tipping off the police. But tragically, he mistook an innocent man, John Stanisha, a computer consultant and father of 3, for Sinclair. Arnold confronted Stanisha outside a bar and shot him dead.
Just unbelievable. A completely innocent bystander killed because of the fallout from the Tylenol case.
It's awful. Arnold was convicted for murdering Stanisha, served about 15 years of a 30-year sentence. He even admitted later from prison that the pressure and scrutiny from the Tylenol investigation had contributed to his mental state leading up to the shooting.
And like Lewis, Arnold remained a Tylenol suspect. Was his DNA tested too?
Yes. When the FBI reopened the case in 2010, they actually got a court order to exhume Roger Arnold's body for DNA testing. And just like with Lewis, the results came back as a non-match to the DNA found on the bottles. So these two most prominent suspects, the ones investigated for decades, modern forensics seem to exclude both of them, which is a major reason the case is still cold.
Which brings us to maybe the most out there theory, but one that has some strange logic to it. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber.
Yeah, it sounds wild at first, but the geography and timing are intriguing. Kaczynski was definitely active around Chicago in the years leading up to 1982. His first string of bombings from 78 to 80 were right there in Chicago and its suburbs. And we know his parents had a house in Lombard, Illinois in 1982, and he sometimes stayed there. The proximity is undeniable.
But it's more than just proximity, isn't it? There's something about his targeting.
Right. This is what makes the theory more compelling than just coincidence. Kaczynski had this known pattern of selecting targets, often based on symbolic names, specifically names related to nature, like wood or trees.
And the Tylenol connection?
Johnson & Johnson. The founders were Robert Wood Johnson and James Wood Johnson. That detail, the wood connection, fits Kaczynski's established, almost obsessive symbolic targeting system perfectly. It makes you wonder, could the Tylenol poisonings have been an earlier, different kind of attack for him before he fully committed to bombs, targeting corporate America through its symbols?
Did the FBI ever seriously investigate this link? Did they get his DNA?
They did take it seriously. In 2011, they formally requested Kaczynski's DNA for a comparison against the Tylenol evidence. Kaczynski, already in prison for life, apparently denied ever having potassium cyanide. And the FBI, well, they've never publicly stated whether his DNA was a match or not. So the Unabomber link remains this tantalizing but unproven theory hanging out there.
So despite all the efforts, the initial investigation, the later reviews, the DNA testing on Lewis and Arnold, the look at Kaczynski, we still don't know. The person who did this just vanished.
Completely vanished, achieved mass terror, caused immense change, and remained anonymous. It's deeply unsettling. But while the killer remains a ghost, the impact of those 7 deaths was absolutely massive. It wasn't just a Chicago crime story or a PR case study. It literally sparked a revolution in safety regulations that affects almost everything you buy today, especially medicines.
Yeah, this is where you see the direct line from tragedy to the everyday things we take for granted. Those safety seals, they basically didn't exist in the same way before Tylenol. Those 7 deaths forced the entire industry, pharma, food, everything, to invent and mandate tamper-resistant packaging.
And when we say tamper-resistant, we mean multiple layers. The plastic shrink wrapper on the outside of the box, that came from this. The foil seal that's fused onto the mouth of the bottle that you have to peel off, that too. Sometimes there are even inner seals or blister packs inside. The whole point was to give the consumer an obvious, immediate visual cue if someone had messed with the product. Something totally missing in '82.
And it wasn't just industry changing itself, right? The law had to change too. Product tampering wasn't even a federal crime before this.
Not really, not in a comprehensive way. It might have fallen under other statutes, but there wasn't a specific federal law targeting it with serious penalties. The Tylenol case created immediate pressure on Congress to fix that.
So they passed a new law.
Yes, very quickly. The Federal Anti-Tampering Act. It made maliciously contaminating consumer products a major federal felony. Suddenly, doing something like this wasn't just a local crime. It was treated much more seriously, like an act of domestic terrorism under federal jurisdiction. It gave prosecutors real teeth to go after future cases.
And we saw that law used pretty effectively later on, didn't we? Like with the Excedrin case.
Absolutely. The 1986 Excedrin poisonings in Washington state resulted in the conviction of Stella Nickel. She'd killed her husband and another person with cyanide-laced Excedrin for insurance money. She was convicted under that new federal anti-tampering law and got 90 years. It showed the law worked as both a deterrent and a tool for justice.
You mentioned earlier that J&J shifted towards tablets. Was there a broader move away from capsules because of this?
Oh, definitely. That was one of the biggest physical changes across the entire pharmaceutical industry, especially for over-the-counter stuff. The Tylenol case proved that the standard two-part gelatin capsule was just too easy to open and refill. It was the weak link.
So explain the difference again, the capsule versus the caplet.
Sure. A capsule, has those two interlocking shells, usually made of gelatin, filled with powder. You can physically pull them apart. A caplet, though, looks like a capsule. It's got that elongated shape, so it's easy to swallow. But it's actually a solid tablet. It's one compressed piece of medication. You can't pull it apart or fill it with powder. So replacing capsules with solid caplets, especially for pain relievers, was probably the single biggest design change to come out of this for safety.
It's incredible how pervasive that change is. One historian quoted in the sources said the Tylenol case caused an unparalleled and gigantic change in packaging worldwide. Every time you struggle to get that foil seal off a new bottle,
Yeah,
that's the legacy.
it absolutely is. But there was a dark side to the immediate aftermath, too. The copycat effect. The intense media coverage, while necessary, also gave disturbed individuals a playbook, a blueprint for causing terror using everyday items.
So there were other incidents right after.
Hundreds. In the weeks and months following the Chicago murders, there was this wave of copycat attacks, hoaxes, threats, involving Tylenol, other medicines, food products, all across the U.S. The panic itself became contagious.
And some of those later cases were deadly serious, using the same method.
Sadly, yes. Beyond the 86 Excedrin case, there were the Sudafed tampering deaths in Washington state in 1991. Joseph Milling was convicted for killing 2 people that way. It proved the threat hadn't gone away, and even the new packaging wasn't foolproof, just much better. Constant vigilance was needed.
And the fear spread beyond just capsules too, right? Weren't other pain relievers targeted?
Yeah, briefly. In 86, there was a scare involving tampered Anacin capsules in Texas, though that death was later ruled a likely suicide. But the initial fear was immediate, oh no, another one. Procter & Gamble even pulled their pain reliever Encapwin off the market entirely after some tampering hoaxes hit Chicago and Detroit. The brand trust was just too damaged, the product too vulnerable.
And finally, there's the cultural impact. The timing of all this, October 1982, right before Halloween.
Yes, that timing was incredibly unfortunate. It poured gasoline on an existing urban legend, the fear of poisoned Halloween candy. That fear had always been around, mostly unsubstantiated, but the Tylenol crisis made it feel terrifyingly real. An anonymous poisoner could be anywhere, tampering with anything.
Did it actually affect Halloween that year?
Oh, significantly. Sources say many towns actively discouraged trick-or-treating. Parents were terrified, and grocery stores reported candy sales dropped by over 20% nationwide that October. The image of the anonymous poisoner messing with packaged goods became permanently lodged in the public psyche. #tagoutro. So when you wrap it all up, this deep dive really shows the tragic equation, doesn't it? 7 innocent people lost their lives in this horrific, calculated, random poisoning. But that single awful act forced this complete global revolution in consumer safety. It changed forever how companies package things and how we as consumers interact with medicine and food.
Right. All those seals, the solid pills, the federal laws. That entire safety net we rely on now is the direct, if terrible, legacy of those 7 people in Chicago. It's this massive societal change, absolutely undeniable, but bought at such an unthinkable human cost.
And the central mystery remains: the killer. That ghost is still out there, metaphorically speaking. Decades of investigation, reopening the case, 21st century DNA on the main suspects, Lewis and Arnold. And the results: non-matches. The Unabomber theory, still just a theory. Officially, the Chicago Tylenol murders are still cold, unsolved.
Which leaves us with this really chilling final thought to chew on. Whoever did this, they achieved this huge, arguably profound change in society's safer packaging worldwide. But they did it through the most monstrous means imaginable. So you have to wonder, was that a goal? Was it some twisted way to attack a corporation, knowing the deaths and the chaos would force the government and industry to make things safer? It's a horrible question, but the consequences of what was in those few poison capsules, well, they're still protecting us every single time you open a new box or bottle today.